Ugh. I know this is instantly going to make me sound like a jaded old man. But what happened to single-player shooter campaigns? Pretty much from the time that video games made that quantum leap into 3D, first-person shooters have dominated the landscape. And while the multiplayer aspect has been baked in since practically the beginning, which definitely goes a long way to explain their continued popularity, there was certainly a golden age for the genre when it came to single-player options. Even if we are going as far back as Doom, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, or Medal of Honor, there was a time not too long ago in the grand scheme of things where campaigns were arguably just as important, if not more important, to a shooter's critical and financial success than their multiplayer modes. Whether we are talking about the heavy hitters like Halo, Half-Life, Fear, Call of Duty, or even the more cult and experimental titles like Timesplitters, the Metroid Prime series, Painkiller, or The Darkness, there was a time where some of the most interesting stuff happening in video games was happening while we were experiencing it from the first-person perspective in a unique campaign mode. But sadly, things have changed. Multiplayer is king when it comes to most first-person shooters nowadays, and with the live service model being all too attractive to the corporate overlords that actively get to decide which games do and do not get to be made, it should come as no surprise to anyone watching that today, if you jump into an FPS, you will usually be inundated with ads for microtransactions, loot boxes, or if you are into the shady side of everything that is going on in gaming's dark underbelly, gambling websites that will gladly take all of your money just to give you the chance at scoring a unique knife skin for Counter-Strike. As I already told you, I'm clearly jaded. And just to keep things fair, there are certainly tons of boomer shooters coming out from the indie side, and Doom Dark Ages is right around the corner. But even now, those feel more like subversions and future cult classics when compared to the norm. Releasing a full campaign used to be the standard, and nothing made it more clear to me that things had changed than when Halo Infinite was released as a free-to-play multiplayer game, with the campaign only being accessible if you had either paid for the title outright or had Game Pass at the time of its release. Halo had moved from a series that clearly prioritized both campaign and multiplayer modes, with certain entries like ODST and Reach being arguably more single-player focused titles, to a series that was undoubtedly putting most of its efforts into yet another live service title. And with today's video, that's more or less what I'm interested in getting into, because just as everything, especially in the AAA shooter space, was headed towards where it is today, there was one game that was a huge anomaly. And that game was, of course, Titanfall 2. But first, a little backstory. Titanfall 1 and its eventual 2016 sequel, and holy shit, Titanfall 2 is almost 10 years old. Both games were made by Respawn Entertainment. Yeah, the Apex Legends team, as they are known today. But let's circle back to that later. For the uninitiated, Respawn was born out of some pretty messed up circumstances. Founders Jason West and Vince Zampella were actually two of the founding forces behind Infinity Ward. Yeah, that Infinity Ward. The independent studio that was created after West and Zampella worked on Medal of Honor Allied Assault for the developer 2015 Inc. The pair decided to strike out on their own just after making one of the best games for EA's then untouchable franchise. And then the founders decided to become direct competitors with Medal of Honor with the first entry in the Call of Duty franchise under their new company, Infinity Ward. Activision helped fund the early ventures of IW before outright buying the studio once it became apparent that the team was onto something huge. Infinity Ward developed 2003's Call of Duty, which was a huge success. And smelling money, Activision began to greenlight several entries in the franchise. Call of Duty was ported to the N-Gage of all things by Omegasoft, and Call of Duty Finest Hour brought the franchise to the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. And rest in peace, Spark Unlimited. But then Infinity Ward dropped a proper sequel in 2005, right on time for the launch of the Xbox 360. And if you weren't there for that release, it's kind of hard to describe how ahead of everything else Call of Duty 2 felt back in October of 2005. The graphics were just completely on another level, and those smoke effects alone, I'm unconvinced that they weren't the deciding factor in making Call of Duty 2 the closest thing that the Xbox 360 had to a system seller at launch. But after completing Call of Duty 2, Infinity Ward decided that in order to advance their creative vision, the team would be leaving the well-tread realm of World War II shooters behind. And again, if you weren't there at the time, it got to the point where critics and gamers alike had almost become fatigued with the constant World War II themed shooters. They were everywhere. Call of Duty notwithstanding, between the years of 2003 and Infinity Ward's next release that would become Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, released in 2007, it felt like you couldn't go more than just a few months without seeing yet another game featuring the Eastern, Western, or Pacific fronts. Seriously, in just that 4-year period, we had Wolfenstein Enemy Territory, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault, European Assault, Medal of Honor Heroes, Medal of Honor Vanguard and Airborne, and Company of Heroes. And those are just some of the heavy hitters. Believe me, we do not have the time to go into all of the Il-2 Sturmovich games or Silent Hunters 3 for that matter. I mean, there are entire wikis dedicated to tracking World War II games, and a shit ton of them came out just during this time. Like seriously man, who else here remembers the outfit? But while Infinity Ward was looking toward the future, or at least modern day, Activision greenlit Treyarch's Call of Duty 3 and Big Red 1, which kept the franchise locked into that World War II time period. But once Modern Warfare hit, everything changed. And an entire generation was exposed not only to arguably Infinity Ward's most important game to date, but also to the brain rot that was found in the game's Xbox Live lobbies.
Don't you guys fucking learn how to actually play the fucking game and talk?
Shoot a gun, dog. Learn how to fucking shoot a gun. You fucking riot shield. What else am I gonna talk about? Riot shield. I'm a pussy that use riot shield.
Call of Duty was enormous when it was just a World War II franchise, but Modern Warfare, that shit was different. Selling around 7 million copies by January 2008, just a few months after its November 5th, 2007 release. And with such a cash cow, tensions began to rise. Activision continued to outsource titles from other companies, PS2 titles, PSP and Nintendo DS Call of Duty games dropped while a 2-year dev cycle was taking place within Infinity Ward. But Activision wanted a full-scale Call of Duty title released annually. And again, Treyarch was back in full tilt mode in order to release yet another World War II shooter. This time in 2008's Call of Duty World at War. And while, for me personally, this was a bit of a sidestep, and sort of marked the beginning of the end of my interest in this series, World at War hit pretty damn hard, and a lot of people that I've spoken to over the years look back on this title fondly even today. And it was with this particular entry that the alternating release schedule of Infinity War Call of Duty versus Treyarch Call of Duty was cemented. 2009 brought us Modern Warfare 2, which again, huge release. Over 4.7 million copies moved within the first 24 hours, huge. And while it continued where Modern Warfare left off, and while it dialed up the action, the online lobbies, and even broke the brains of certain pearl-clutching talking heads on TV with its depiction of a domestic terror attack in its now infamous No Russian level, this game in a lot of ways represents the final release of the Infinity Ward that had brought us Call of Duty 2, and Modern Warfare. Because there was trouble brewing in the relationship between Activision and Infinity Ward behind the scenes, and more specifically between Activision and IW's founding members. After the titanic success that was 2007's release, Weston Zampella had leverage, and with it they secured a deal with the publisher that left them with creative control over the Call of Duty IP, which in turn gave them the ability to control the direction that the series would be moving in. But when you are dealing with a company as massive and litigious as Activision, you better believe that they weren't going to let two creative types change the trajectory of what they had planned for the license. Written into the agreement was a clause that stated that in the event that West and Zampella were fired, Activision would acquire the full rights to the Call of Duty franchise. And amid the development of Modern Warfare 3, Zampella and West were suddenly fired from Infinity Ward, with insubordination and breach of contract being the excuses given. And internally, Activision began trying to dig up dirt on the founders, while also trying to retain any staff that didn't leave in solidarity. The founders sued Activision for $36 million in damages, and then Activision countersued. And right before the case was set to go to court in 2012, Activision settled for an undisclosed amount of money, while also being forced to pay another sum to the Infinity Ward employee group for unpaid bonuses. Never forget who we are dealing with here. And this turn of events is ultimately why I haven't touched a Call of Duty game since. But after the founders were wrongfully terminated, they immediately started their next company, Respawn Entertainment, Key talent from Infinity Ward followed suit, and in 2011, before the settlement was even reached, Electronic Arts label president Frank Gabao let it be known that Respawn's first project was going to be a new science fiction shooter published by EA. And after the game was announced at E3 in 2013 and West left the new company, taking this moment to retire from the industry altogether, Titanfall was released for Windows and Xbox consoles on March 11, 2014. And even at release, it was clear that this new team, comprised of some of the best in the industry, meant business. The framework that had been established with Call of Duty was present, but Titanfall was something new and exciting. Movement that really pushed the genre forward, wall running, and double jumps that made the player characters known as pilots feel like superhero avatars when compared to the rest of what the competition was doing. Mech, or Titan combat, brought a new wrinkle to the Call of Duty score streak mechanic, in which pilots would be able to perform their titular Titanfall and drop a giant mech onto the battlefield, complete with their own custom loadouts. The game was fast, gritty, and completely different from what Infinity Ward had done before, and the game had a great critical reception, and sales were just as solid, with nearly 1 million physical copies being sold within the first 2 weeks of release, and 10 million copies sold worldwide within 2 years as reported by IGN. But players and critics agreed that there was one glaring omission from Respawn's first outing, and it was the lack of any traditional single-player campaign. Titanfall was multiplayer focused, and while there was a story and campaign of sorts, it was baked into the multiplayer experience. A battle between the Interstellar Manufacturing Corporation and the Frontier Militia raged on during matches, but players just starting to get their feet wet were introduced to formal tutorials and then to mission bookends to ground the conflict in a strung-together narrative. And while this style of storytelling definitely did have its fans, with many players enjoying the overall gritty tone and the vibe of the experience, there was definitely no shortage of players and critics lamenting an opportunity to really dive in headfirst into an authored campaign. Luckily, when it came time for a sequel, Respawn made this a priority, and they may have created one of the best single-player campaigns ever made. Production began on Titanfall 2 shortly after the first game was released, and although the first title had strong initial sales, the game did experience a much lower long-term engagement than Respawn had expected. Titanfall's director Steve Fuketa came to the conclusion that a lack of interest in this game's community seemed to stem from the lack of a proper campaign, and Zampella and producer Drew McCoy had similar thoughts and hoped that a more robust campaign would make the overall package feel more complete. But with this being the studio's first real crack at a single-player narrative, they wanted to do something different than they had ever done before, and they definitely did not want to make yet another Call of Duty style campaign. But with most of the senior staff at Respawn having cut their teeth on Call of Duty single-player missions, this sudden departure was kinda hard for them to wrap their heads around. But instead of just locking themselves into something that might have just taken the mechanics from the first game and thrust them down a similar road, Respawn instead hosted in-studio game jams, where no idea was too out there, no concept was off the table, and where the team had more creative freedom than ever before, with the only constraint being that Titanfall's existing mechanics had to be present in whatever they were showing. And these ideas, levels, or just products of these game jams began to make up the skeleton of what would eventually become Titanfall 2's mission structure. These microgames became prototypes of what was eventually referred to as action blocks internally. Set pieces were coming up with cool ideas and doing rad shit was the focus. And from there, the team then had the challenge of taking all of these seemingly unrelated blocks and stringing them together to form a cohesive narrative. Internally, the campaign was called 211, named after a philosophy that was shaping the project, where every level was comprised of 2 parts centered around pilot combat, 1 part being focused around Titanfall's unique pilot movement and first-person platforming, and then the final part being focused around being inside of one of Titanfall's trademark mechs. And this non-linear and gameplay-first development, it fucking worked. When you first start playing Titanfall 2's campaign, the game greets you with a pretty interesting jumping off point. You play as Jack Cooper, a rifleman in the Frontier Militia, on your way to the alien planet of Typhon in order to thwart the IMC's expansion. But you are immediately introduced to your mentor, Captain Lastimosa, as he is priming Cooper for combat, with Cooper hoping to one day become a pilot like his captain, and in turn, one day command his own Titan. Cooper and Lastimosa meet in VR in a simulated version of the captain's home planet, and it is here where the basic tutorialization is done. Learn how to run, learn how to slide under obstacles, learn how to shoot, and most importantly, learn advanced techniques like wall running and chaining all of your movement options together. After the basic stuff is introduced to the player, Cooper finds himself at the pilot's gauntlet. Similar to how Modern Warfare's training course taught the player all the basics, but there was an added incentive to perform efficiently, the Pilot's Gauntlet is a step up from what Call of Duty did in just about every way. You have to make your way through this training course while keeping your top speed at a maximum, all while shooting dummy targets and raining down grenades. Successful completion of the course gives you the opportunity to go ahead with the story along with a recommended difficulty dependent on your performance. But just like in COD 4, the chance to master what is in front of you is made available. And here the push toward mastery is dangled in front of you with a leaderboard of other pilots' best times. And here eagle-eyed players can not only spot your captain's time, but also director Steve Hukeda's time to beat. And if you think that you're up to the challenge, there is a trophy or achievement for landing yourself in one of the top 3 spots. For this particular playthrough, I just went fast enough to place myself in hard mode, but when I first played this game years ago, I made it a point that I would not leave the gauntlet until I got that trophy. And I played it over and over and over again until I was finally able to grind it out. And I then went on to play the game on the hardest difficulty in order to secure the platinum for Titanfall 2. I was a real degenerate back then. But now, as a married 37-year-old dude, I was just happy to be able to hobble my way through it at a decent clip. But I still look back at that process fondly. Figuring out how to maximize speed by jumping off of a wall as soon as your run starts, firing grenades with precision, and taking down targets while mid-slide, it's all rad stuff. And it should be stated that this particular Gauntlet's top scorer, this was actually updated as the game went on. And the #1 spot actually belongs to a fellow YouTuber, GameSager, or G-Sager, who used to post all sorts of insane Titanfall 2 videos. And his time through the Gauntlet was so ridiculous that it was immortalized on this scoreboard. After learning the basics, your simulation crashes once you try to call your own virtual Titan. And that is because the IMC has spotted your invading ship. And from this point on, things start to go sideways. You and the rest of your company drop pod onto the planet below, the ship that you were in moments before is destroyed, and the battle for Typhon begins. And this opening mission, it does a couple of interesting things. All of the double jumps and wall runs that you did while you were in simulation, they are not available to you here on this battlefield. Cooper is not a pilot in real life. He is a lowly grunt. So you are introduced to this game through a realization of a power fantasy that you do not get to actually embody. So suddenly, when the game actually starts, you feel weak, incompetent, and exposed as you face your first wave of IMC robots. And their glowing red eyes played against the foliage and cliffsides of Typhon as twilight begins to set in. This was the first moment where I realized how good this game's art direction was, and still is nearly 10 years after release. But of course, this is nothing compared to what the game gets into as it goes on. You fight through this battle, completely exposed, all of the coolest parts of Titanfall 2 taken away from you, and it was here that I started to wonder. Was this opening sequence a dig at Call of Duty and the games that were being made since Zampella and West were fired? I mean, think about it. You have the guns, grenades, you can aim down sights. In this particular sequence, it plays like a very traditional FPS, even a very tight one at that. But you've already been given a taste of something so much cooler. But just as that thought was starting to take shape, a Titan drops, or falls, right on top of Cooper, and you are critically wounded. Everything looks like it's lost. That is, until your captain performs his own Titanfall and saves your ass. But as you lose consciousness, Lastimosa finds himself in a 3v1 against a faction known as the Apex Predators, and Lastimosa and his Titan are taken out of commission. After coming to and almost being snacked on by rejected creature designs from James Cameron's Avatar, Cooper is spared as Lastimosa uses his remaining energy to save the player character one final time, and what follows is a sad goodbye to our mentor character. But that sadness is kind of outweighed by what it implies.
Cooper, take my Titan. Use my helmet in my jump kit. This is the real thing. Take care of him.
And after a somber burial scene, Cooper begins taking his first steps into becoming a pilot for real. The first mission in this title is hardly the best that Titanfall 2 has to offer, but it does get the ball rolling in some interesting ways. First, Cooper's pilot kit takes a minute to come fully online, so it is just the basic wall running and sliding that is accessible at first, as the game drip feeds you back to full power. And while the systems are activating, we are given our first mission of finding a power source to bring Lastimosa's, our new Titan back online. But it is here where some of the more interesting parts of Titanfall 2's combat and movement start to come into play. First, once all your systems are back online, Cooper's mobility outclasses just about anything or anyone that he can come across in this mission, and for that matter, the rest of the game. All of the wall running, double jumps, and slide canceling to maintain maximum speed is present and accounted for, so getting the drop on your enemies is a very easy thing to do. But that is only one side of the coin. Very early on in my initial playthrough, which I had done on the master difficulty, Titanfall 2's enemy AI has all the makings of a competent, if not downright difficult force to go up against, complete with homing grenades and hit scan weapons. But between your mobility and your suit's rechargeable personal cloak that makes you momentarily undetectable, I learned that it is not only easy to maneuver and outflank your opponents, but in several encounters throughout the campaign, you straight up have the ability to turn on the cloak and dip. Hiding and running from one checkpoint to another is just as valid as any strategy in many key moments. And although we have been able to run from one checkpoint to the next in many other first-person shooter campaigns avoiding suppressing fire, Titanfall 2's movement makes it feel like this strategy is not only viable, but also organic to the role of a pilot. And I don't know, I think that being an optional playstyle just rules. Especially when we consider that we are playing not only as someone who has just barely put on the suit, but also as someone who is outgunned and outmanned. You shoot, you run, you get the power source, and you get the hell out of Dodge. And through a genius little bit of level design, following the linear path loops you back around to your starting point and your Titan organically. And it is here where we are introduced to the second most important character in this game, BT-7274, or just BT for short.
Power at 2/3. Data core reinitialized. Ocular system online. Adjusting focus. Are you all right, pilot?
I think so. Wait, did you just call me pilot?
Yes.
And after a quick introduction, we are tasked with retrieving some remaining batteries for our new ally. But with BT semi-functional, Titanfall 2 wastes no time in starting to build the relationship between Cooper and his new Titan. With Cooper voiced by Matt Mercer, a veteran voice actor who has done more high-profile work than we even have time to properly get into, even though he will always be Persona 5's Yusuke Kitagawa for me.
You'll never see it come back.
And Glenn Steinbaum taking on his first marquee role as BT, you don't pull out the big guns like Matt Mercer unless your character has something to say. And Glenn absolutely crushed his role as your big metallic friend. Even when the game was in development, director Steve Fukeda realized that with this game's set-piece driven design and emphasis on forcing the player into more and more novel situations as they went from running and gunning to piloting, that a certain bond seemed to be forming between the two characters organically. And instead of scaling it back, Fukeda started pushing the team-up dynamic into the forefront when it came to writing the scenarios and dialogue alongside fellow writers Manny Hagapian and Jesse Stern. Early on, Fukeda began to think of Titanfall 2 as a buddy cop action story and referenced movies like Lethal Weapon and Beverly Hills Cop as key inspirations while writing early drafts of the script. In fact, internally, BT's name, BT-7274, apparently the BT stands for Buddy Titan. But the team at Respawn was always worried about towing the line between creating something that would end up cute and lovable or pushing it too far into the opposite direction and creating something that felt cold and distant. The writers worked for 5 months to get the tone right, and the team worked on things that would ground BT as a character by giving him human arms and hands and a big expressive eye that would dilate and make it clear which tone he was indicating, while simultaneously referencing soulless death machines like the Boeing AH-64 Apache helicopter when it came to his physical design. And all of this care put into figuring out who BT would ultimately become, I cannot stress how much it paid off. Even early interactions between the two characters like this one,
against turning yourself over to the IMC. Voice pattern analysis indicates they are lying.
But don't worry, BT. I'm not going anywhere.
Understood, but I do recommend you move. IMC salvage teams are not far away.
I'm moving.
or this one.
It's good to see you, buddy.
It is good to see you too, pilot. The controls to deactivate the sludge flow are in the next chamber, marking your HUD.
Under all of the modulation and effects, Steinbaum is always able to bring levity and humanity to his otherwise over-analytical and data-driven personality. And Mercer, he is just as believable a reluctant hero as we could ever play as. After collecting the final battery, looping around the environment a few times, getting into firefights, and finding collectible pilot helmets that require just a little bit more mastery of this game's movement mechanics than the title usually otherwise expects, we are finally able to get BT up and moving again. And not a moment too soon, because once we do, shit pops off. and in a brilliant tutorial of BT's default loadout, Expedition, we are shown the destructive power of this mech from the driver's seat. Chain guns, multi-locking rockets, vortex shields, and electric smoke. We have access to all of these as we take on waves of human enemies and eventually an enemy titan. And it must be said, when you see the enemies who were originally giving you trouble running away from BT as scared little ants, it is kinda hard not to get sucked into the power fantasy of it all. And I'll get around to talking about the weapons and overall feel of everything in a bit, but it cannot be understated just how good BT's default chain gun sounds while firing. All of that sub bass and the metallic clinking of ejected shells, you feel proper invincible when you are first introduced to this style of combat. From a plot perspective, it is here where BT lets Cooper know that he has to carry on Lastimosa's role in the larger conflict. And at first that requires that Cooper and BT meet up with and join the militia in their ongoing assault. But it is here where I'm going to actively step away from discussing the plot beats of the game and talk more about its overall design and feel. But first I will say this. This is not Shakespeare. You have enemies to fight, you got a buddy titan to help you do it, you are the good guys, go beat those space capitalists. But it is really in the flow of the narrative and its scenarios and the deepening emotional core of this game that is the relationship between BT and Cooper, where the motivation to push forward is always found. And on that level, the game is constantly finding new ways to impress the player. Playing Titanfall here in 2025, it is kind of hard to overlook that this campaign is kind of old school by today's standards. And by that, I mean Titanfall 2 is a level-based affair. There are always reasons for each jump between locations, and the game does a very good job of tying everything together, but this is not a seamless experience. There are no open worlds here, and Titanfall 2 couldn't claim to be a one-shot like the directors of God of War claimed. But I would argue that in this case, for this particular game, I think it only works in Titanfall 2's favor, and it is here where we see the action block design philosophy in full effect. One moment you might be charging an IMC stronghold from the cockpit of your Titan, gathering new loadouts that let you change BT's ordnance on the fly, and each time one is made available, the campaign is tailored in such a way to make them the star of the show, with authored moments that make sure that you get to experience the full array of what was just made available to you. All the different weapons, subsystems, and even core abilities which function similarly to ultimate attacks found in MOBAs and team shooters. But get through the carnage of mechanized combat, and Cooper may find himself platforming through sewer systems, giant assembly lines, gargantuan satellite arrays, or even transporting back and forth through time in two distinctive periods while fighting battles taking place simultaneously in parallel universes. And really, it is here where Titanfall 2 shines. Each mission has either a set piece or a gimmick that makes it completely unique from what preceded it. And in one of my personal favorite examples, especially from an art direction and scenario design standpoint, few levels in any game can live up to the raw imagination that is on display in the World Foundry level. During a mid-game mission, Cooper and BT decide to cut through an IMC production plant on their way to locate a high-ranking militia officer. But in a twisting labyrinth of automated conveyor belts and mechanical arms, BT and Cooper are separated after your buddy is captured. Cooper then has to follow the production line deeper and deeper into the facility as you deal with increasingly difficult platforming and an onslaught of enemy combatants. And between what is happening to you and all of the automated processes you see going on in the background, the illusion of this mega factory is sold 10 times over. And in all honesty, this is a mind-bending scenario. The factory feels vast and confusing, but brilliant pops of color in the environment, yellow safety equipment, and red warning lights guide the player through it all just as well, if not better, than the small squads peppered into the environment to show you where to go next. But if there is one key moment that makes this level all the more special, it is what happens once you find yourself stuck in the manufacturing process. Riding a platform like a gondola, all while enemies are taking potshots at you, eventually walls, staircases, and additional floors and wings are added to your platform, until you are in something that resembles a house. But the mechanical process outside the building cares very little about how the thing is being handled with Cooper inside, as the automation coldly flips the domicile around and on its side as it continues to bolt on layer after layer. And I'll never forget that moment, thinking, oh shit, the IMC, they're mass producing barracks or manufactured housing or something. But eventually Cooper has to abandon this new building, opting for a larger prefabbed platform. But eventually this new place is elevated into a simulation dome complete with a pre-rendered skybox that instantly looks artificial and uncanny. And as you get your bearings, More and more parcels of simulated land begin to join you in this simulated area until it becomes abundantly clear that you are in a weapons testing facility. And this prefab town is nothing more than a facsimile, similar to what we saw in the popular Nuketown map from Call of Duty Black Ops or the real-life deserts of Nevada during the US's testing of the atomic bomb. A firefight breaks out here between militia forces and IMC Reapers, small automated mechs that are agile and aggressive, and all the while the hexagonal panels that make up the skybox of the dome flicker in and out, making this combat exercise feel all the more alien. You fight and you fight until some of the panels are blown out and a gaping hole between the simulated environment and the very real foundry outside, inside outside, fuck, it just looks super cool and very disorienting. And just in this little chunk of everything that I've outlined, Respawn uses just about every moment to show off not only their technical proficiency, but also their art direction and scenario design. And every level is like this. Every level has a hook, and in some specific cases with the self-contained nature of every level allowing for crazy experimentation, there are moments where every level almost feels like its own game unto itself. I glossed over it previously, but shortly after the Foundry level, there is a mission called Effect and Cause, in which Cooper's continued search for his major leads him into the ruins of an IMC research complex. But as you explore the environment, temporal shifts occur on a scripted basis that cause Cooper to become kind of unstuck in time. Here in the present one moment, and then back in the research facility during its heyday in the next, with it becoming more and more clear that we are witnessing the events that led to the collapse of this facility and whatever fracture in time we are experiencing. And not only is this awesome from an artistic perspective, as we are constantly shown the after and before shots of this place, rubble one moment to a sterile and sophisticated science fiction setting the next, but once it starts to factor into gameplay, things become far more interesting. After finding Major Anderson, who had somehow found himself split in half and embedded in the ceiling, presumably during a bad time jump, Cooper takes a handheld device known as the Time Gauntlet from his deceased commanding officer. And Jesus Christ, man, talk about failing upward. Cooper has now been on the job for just a few hours, and now he's got his dead captain's suit and mech, and now he's taken a device that can bend time at will from the next dead guy he's run across. But from this point forward in the mission, time jumping is at will, and in an insane bit of programming with just the push of a button, Cooper can find himself in either timeline, complete with unique puzzle opportunities and firefights. And the way that Respawn works this new mechanic into these action sequences is nothing short of insane. Imagine fighting a battle with two fronts spread across years in a way that feels fun and spastically cathartic. Oh, you're getting surrounded? Dip into another timeline, run from a threat in this new one, slide back to where you came from, and then pop back into the old timeline to get the drop on the enemies you were just fighting. It is kind of confusing to even write about, and it is just something that kind of has to be played in context to be fully understood. But it is fucking awesome, and it doesn't just apply to combat, as platforming sequences require the same sort of back and forth actions. You will be wall running one moment and realize that the next window that you want to jump to is busted in your current timeline, and just as you make your leap, you can switch over to the other timeline and keep the momentum going. This whole section feels like something out of a puzzle platformer, not quite Portal-esque or Ori and the Blind Forest, but not enough unlike them to lose the comparison. And what I especially love about this level is the fact that you've just been given this new piece of equipment, this new mechanic that completely changes the game at large, but instead of taking it with you to the next level, it just breaks by the time this section is over, keeping the level self-contained and keeping you excited for what comes next. And it keeps going like this, level by level. And no matter what style of game you're into, there's probably something for you here. If you're into the hardcore action puzzly bits, there is a section in the level The Beacon where Cooper finds himself in possession of an arc tool, a gun of sorts that can remotely turn electric switches on and off. And the resulting platforming, complete with activated wind turbines, feels like something out of Sonic the Hedgehog, with boosted movement carrying the player through the level at top speeds in something that almost feels like an auto-scroller or something like that. And later in the same level, a construction site and its sky cranes are used to create something that feels directly out of Mirror's Edge or Prince of Persia, in what has to be one of the most beautiful levels ever made. And then when we look at how BT gets the level going in the first place, shit is rad.
My analysis indicates a throw is our only option here. I can throw you across the gap.
Are you sure about this?
There is a 68% chance of success. Wind, 3 knots, heading 274. Range, 95 meters. Projectile mass, 89 kilograms. Trust me.
And speaking of BT, although most of what I would consider the highlights of this game are definitely locked behind the more experimental and platformy bits, Some of the large assault Titan sequences really scale the conflict up to something incredible. All the while, you are switching between loadouts in order to constantly mix up the action. Scorch is a flame-based Titan that feels cruel and unusual when used against infantry, Ronin lets you swing a freaking broadsword at dueling Titans, and the Legion's Predator Cannon feels like it was created in order to create war crimes when it is used against human targets. But the highlights of each Titan section are definitely when the Apex Predator squad shows up and lets the player engage in Titan-on-Titan boss fights. This is the squad that killed Lastimosa, this is the squad that you hear chatter from throughout the levels, and even though they are more villain of the week material in terms of what they actually do throughout the plot, they sport cool enough designs, custom Titans, and combat encounters to make each fight feel like a big enough deal for you to get excited. Like I said, there's something in this game for everyone. But even though what makes Titanfall 2 so appealing is this grab bag design, is ultimately the way that everything is ground together in order to make it feel cohesive where the magic ultimately is. And by that, I mean the evolving relationship with BT, the sophisticated design of all of the weapons and equipment, and the focus on mobility, platforming, and how they all interconnect in this game's combat. And although I've definitely been showing tons of footage throughout this video, which should already be more than enough for you to have a sense of what is going on in this game, I will say this. The gunplay here in Titanfall 2 is world class. This game is from the original Call of Duty guys, so no surprises here. But everything is so goddamn snappy. Aiming down sights is complemented by just enough magnetism and auto-aim to make you feel exceptionally lethal. Time to death is in that perfect sweet spot, and the designs of all the weapons feel like excellent reimaginings of the standard FPS suite. But I will say this real quick. I've always maintained that for me personally, the mark of a good weapon balance in any shooter is how effective the shotgun feels. Think about it. Name a game that has a dope shotgun that isn't a rad game altogether. Fear, Doom, BioShock, Half-Life, Halo. If the shotgun is good, the game is good. And both the EVA 8 and the Mastiff are damn good shotguns. The ARs, the submachine guns, and the LMGs allow for you to rip and tear, but the shotguns, that's where it's at. In fact, I would say that the only weapons that I wasn't too big on were the grenade launchers, as their placement was few and far between in the missions, and when you finally did get your hands on one, they felt kinda underpowered. And then the sniper rifles, while powerful, they kinda feel out of place here. I mean, this is Titanfall 2. If you have the choice between taking pot shots or wall running and double jumping your way towards enemies, do you really want to stay locked behind cover? And then there's the Smart Pistol. This weapon that auto headshots, it was something that was considered to be the weapon of choice of noobs everywhere in Titanfall 1, as just looking in an enemy's direction would allow for you to mow down AI-controlled goons and the unsuspecting pilot. But here in Titanfall 2, when the chips are down and everything is looking hopeless near the end of the campaign, Respawn ultimately decided to let the player feel like a god in what has to be one of the coolest late game sequences I've ever seen. Seriously, this is a power suit moment if I've ever seen one. But when you couple this title's mobility with the auto-targeting, it rules. Honestly, I could go on and on. I could talk about each and every level. I could spend some time talking about how whenever composer Spencer Barton's impressive score swells up, it elevates some of these incredible moments to the next level. And I could talk about how each Titan step and weaponry has sound design that you can get lost in. But instead, I think I'm going to focus in on something a bit more negative for a second. I mean, come on guys. I can't just glaze this game forever. It was published by EA after all. First, if there is a major complaint that pops up when discussing this campaign, it is its short length. Clocking in around 5 hours or so, this is the type of game that feels like it gets shot out of a cannon, and then just as it is getting to a fever pitch, it's over. And while I always try to advocate for a more succinct experience, I can't say that this one didn't feel just a little shorter than I would have liked. Even after all the amazing crap that was put into this campaign, it is still obvious that Respawn was ultimately hoping that the multiplayer would keep people busy with this title for hours to come. And although I don't really want to get into the multiplayer stuff too much, as this video is about the single player experience, the multiplayer was, and still remains, a good time. I jumped into a few matches while recording for this video, and while matchmaking definitely takes a few minutes nowadays, with its dwindling player base, I was still able to find and play a few matches. But my biggest complaints about the Titanfall license altogether really come from Respawn and where they took this property going forward, and seemingly how little has been done to actually preserve its legacy. As most already know, Respawn jumped on the Battle Royale wagon after the success of PlayerUnknown's massive hit, with Apex Legends set in the Titanfall universe, and they got in at just the right moment to not only get a jump on all the competition, but the game was also blessed in a really fucked up way, as it dropped at just the right moment for it to become one of the bigger successes during the pandemic. Apex Legends is a live service title, and as such they are constantly rolling out content, and there are more than enough skins and microtransactions to keep you not only invested through gameplay, but monetarily also. And if you watch my video on Concord, you will know this is a model that I simply just don't fuck with. It's out of principle at this point more than anything. But like it or not, this is where the Titanfall property has been since early 2019. And even though there are many dedicated fans clamoring for the eventual TF3, not that one, this one, it seems like hopes for a follow-up to both the multiplayer of Titanfall 2 and its campaign are not looking so hot. And while Respawn was working on some sort of single-player Apex Legends related project at one point, as of February 2023, it was announced that work on that project has since been cancelled. And just last month, news broke that there was an unannounced FPS multiplayer project coming out of Respawn, and it too has been cancelled, with many speculating, or at least hoping, that it might have or could have been Titanfall 3. I mean, at this point, fans would rather have news of a dead game than no news at all. But at least for the time being, it would seem that Titanfall has been overshadowed by its live service cousin, and there certainly is a BT-sized hole in the market because of it. But then there is the actual legacy of Titanfall and its sequel. After 8 years of running its servers, and 6 of it running concurrently with its sequel, Titanfall 1 was delisted from all digital marketplaces. And this was amid constant blackouts, as a security flaw in the game's matchmaking made it so that the game was more or less unplayable amid constant DDoS attacks. And really, from what I can tell, this is a shame. I never got around to playing the first game. I didn't have an Xbox when it dropped, and I was kind of at a weird point in my life where I just wasn't playing as many games when it dropped. But from what I've heard, that hybrid campaign was awesome. And although there are certainly YouTube videos that show complete playthroughs of the campaign with all of its cutscenes, if you actually wanted to experience the campaign today, the whole experience is kind of in rough shape. Right now, if you own an original Titanfall 1 disc or own it digitally, and the servers are running as intended, you may be able to try and find a campaign lobby in progress, but player numbers are low, and you will have to jump through more than a few hoops to even attempt to check it out. And I don't know, man, really that just bums me out. If you watched my video on Concord, I made it clear that I am not a fan of this completely online type of experience, because once the player base dries up, or the publisher decides to cut ties with it, all of the content just goes with it. And as a quick aside, in the comments of my Concord video, I was made aware of an ongoing campaign known as Stop Killing Games, which is a campaign that is trying to petition to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers, with their mission stating that an increasing number of video games are sold effectively as goods with no stated expiration date, but designed to be completely unplayable as soon as support from the publisher ends. This practice is a form of planned obsolescence and is not only detrimental to the customers, but makes preservation effectively impossible. Furthermore, the legality of this practice is largely untested in many countries. And from what I can tell, this campaign started around the death of the Ubisoft game The Crew, as once its servers were shut down, all the single player modes went with it. And while it is not one-to-one with what is happening here in Titanfall, I did want to give the movement a small shout out, as it does look like they are trying to effect some change in how these products are handled moving forward. I've linked their website in the description, and right now they have an ongoing petition for the European Citizens Initiative. So if you are a EU gamer, check it out, see if you back the message, and sign it if you are so inclined. But back to Titanfall 1, that title is well on its way to becoming yet another dead game. And once that happens, everything Titanfall 1 will be lost to time. Titanfall 2, however, is in a much better state. Not only does it have arguably one of the best single-player campaigns of all time, and its story does end with a cliffhanger that could allow for the eventual Titanfall 3 anytime Respawn actually wants to get around to it, but it does still have a small community keeping the multiplayer servers alive as well. Titanfall 2 has had its own problems with cyber attacks as well, but as of the time of this writing, you can definitely find some games if you are willing to put up with a little bit of wait time. But I think all of this speaks to how important these single player modes are. Multiplayer modes are not forever, and as we move forward to live service and cloud computing for AI and all the other bells and whistles, they are becoming more and more of a gamble with each passing year. Concord is gone, Multiverses will be gone next month, Titanfall 1 is dying, and Titanfall 2's multiplayer mode will be around until it just can't be sustained. But its campaign pressed on the disk, or more accurately your hard drive, it can be accessed after EA kills the servers. And if you care about preservation or just the ability to be able to revisit some of your favorite games, at least in the case of Titanfall 2's legendary campaign, it is a great thing that it will live on. Long live Titanfall. Hope we see a follow-up one day. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you for watching. It is always greatly appreciated. And if you liked the video, please consider dropping a like, comment, or subscribing to the channel. Or if you are super into what you saw here, you could always become a YouTube member and support the channel directly and have your username featured in the videos in some small creative way. That is all I have to say about Titanfall for now, so on to the next video, and I hope to see you there. But until then, you're all beautiful people, and I hope you have a great day.